After our bulk fermentation time, our dough should be doubled in volume and it should have a nice texture where it's bubbly. And at this point, we're going to pre-shape and bench rest. You're going to take this tool, which is called a dough scraper or bench scraper. Take your dough scraper and quickly push it under half of the dough and then fold it over. And then taking your dough scraper on the outside of your folded dough, you're going to rotate it against the unfloured work surface a few times until it's a rough circle. You don't need to make it perfect, you just want a rough circular shape at this point. Now it's time for it to have a bench rest where we leave it for 20 minutes. This bench rest allows the gluten to relax so that it is more elastic when we do the final shaping in a few minutes. While your dough is having its bench rest, now is the time to prepare your proofing bowl. I use a proofing bowl that looks like this. If you don't have this at home, you can get started with a colander lined with a thin kitchen towel because they allow air to circulate around your shaped dough so that it doesn't lose its shape during the proofing process. To your proofing container, you're going to want to line it with a generous dusting of either rice flour, semolina, durum, or bran. And it's really important that when you prepare your proofing container that you get all the surfaces, the bottom, but also the sides, to make sure that when it's time to bake, that your dough releases easily from the proofing container rather than sticking. After our bench rest is complete, it's time to do our final shaping. This is when we give the dough the structure and tension it needs to become a big, beautiful loaf of bread. You're going to take flour and lightly dust the top of your loaf. Taking that bench scraper or dough scraper, you're going to quickly shove it underneath the dough. You're using your hand on top to guide it. You're going to flip it over so that the floured side of the dough is now resting against your work surface, and that sticky side that was underneath is now facing up. We're going to gently take the two sides of the dough, gently stretch them up, and fold them into the center, almost like a burrito. As we fold them in, we're going to make sure we touch and seal those edges together and make a seam. At the bottom of the seam, you're going to roll the dough onto itself up the seam so that the seam is now inside the dough. Roll up your dough, and then it will come and rest on the opposite end. You'll have the flour side now facing up. To give our dough some tension, we're going to take our dough scraper or bench scraper, use the work surface as a way to develop that tension by pulling our dough with that sticky side facing down. We don't want our dough to flip over. We're going to pull the dough across the surface so it forms a really tight outer surface. And once it looks taut and like a nice smooth ball, you might see a thin layer of dough with some bubbles underneath. That's perfect. It's time to gently take our dough scraper, jut it under the dough, and flip it into our proofing bowl. Now that your dough is in its proofing container, you're going to loosely cover it with either plastic wrap or a kitchen towel so that it doesn't dry out and it continues to rise. It'll proof for 1 to 2 hours at room temperature until it's reaching the top of that proofing container. Your dough is proofed when it's 1.5 to 2 times its volume, and when you moisten your fingertip in water and you gently press on the surface of the dough and it leaves a slight indentation. If you see those signs, it's ready to bake.